It's been about 30 years since the release of Sonic 2, Streets of Rage 2, Shinobi 3, Shining Force, Echo the Dolphin, Sonic CD, Night Trap, and of course, Green Dog the Beached Surfer. This marks the 30th anniversary of 1993, one of the most successful years in Sega history. So of course this leads us to wonder, what does Sega have in store for the future? Sadly, as it turns out, not very much. Now there are two kinds of Sega fans in 2023. Retro fans who love all the classic IPs from the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. Then there are contemporary fans who like 3D Sonic games and Yakuza. Sega still tries to cater to both, so we'll look at this question from both perspectives. First, Retro Sega, aka Real Sega. What's going on in 2023? Well, so far, basically nothing at all. In 2020, Sega announced that they were finished with their long-running Sega Ages project, which saw the re-release and even remaking of numerous classic Sega games for contemporary hardware, in recent years thanks to outsourcing to M2. Herzog's Why for the Nintendo Switch in 2020 was the last game. Then, unexpectedly, the head of Sega's retro game division and the lead producer of the Sega Ages line, Ryoko Kodama, passed away sometime in the first half of 2022. Despite this setback, however, Sega went ahead and released the Sega Genesis Mini 2 late in 2022, which was also developed largely in conjunction with M2 and was dedicated to the memory of Ryoko Kodama, who was instrumental to so many beloved Sega games of the past, such as the Phantasy Star series and Skies of Arcadia. The Sega Genesis Mini 2 would enjoy widespread critical acclaim for its high-quality emulation and unique, hardcore-oriented game library that included titles from Sega's wacky CD attachment. If not for the absence of some key Working Designs games, Snatcher, and the censorship of Bare Knuckle 3, we at the CCP might have regarded the Genesis Mini 2 as a must-buy, almost perfect. But it's not certain that the Sega Genesis Mini 2, with its quirky game library and ugly appearance based on the Model 2 Genesis, has been all that successful. Sega made it clear that the Genesis Mini 2 would be produced in drastically smaller quantities than the original Genesis Mini a few years ago, 10 times fewer in fact. Yet even now the Sega Genesis Mini 2 is still readily available from Amazon.com. It never sold out, not even for Christmas. Perhaps Sega fibbed, or maybe they decided to quietly produce more, or perhaps the $102 price tag, plus $22 for shipping and handling, not including tax, was just too much money for a retro plug-and-play device, regardless of the high quality. I think it's very likely that this high price point caused the Sega Genesis Mini 2 to basically flop. And so far we've seen no indication of anything else coming from Sega's glorious past. No news, no clues on Yosuke Okanari's Twitter account, no more Sega Ages. Nothing. 2023 has nothing on the horizon, so far, for fans of retro Sega, and given the fact that the ostensibly collectible Sega Genesis Mini 2 is still cluttering up some Japanese warehouse, despite having a tenth of the production numbers, and being on the market for months now, I'm not sure Sega will be too keen on improving this situation for some time. Have even retro Sega fans become bored of the Genesis and Mega Drive? It's possible. But what about contemporary Sega? Things are looking a little bit better for 2023, but not really that great either. First off, we have to acknowledge that Sonic Frontiers has performed much better than we expected, both critically and commercially. This is one of those games where critics were quite a bit harsher than the general public, who appear to largely really enjoy the game for what it is. A somewhat wonky though playable 3D Sonic game with a Breath of the Wild themed hub world and epic boss fights. Super Saiyan Sonic, yeah buddy! Sonic Frontiers has sold, as of December 2022, roughly 2.5 million copies worldwide, which is very impressive. Putting this in perspective, Sonic 2, released 30 years prior, sold 3.2 million copies in 2 weeks, which made it the second best-selling Genesis game ever, behind the original Sonic the Hedgehog. So 2.5 million is pretty good, and many of Sega's core 3D Sonic audience absolutely love the game, regardless of whatever flaws it might have. For 2023, Sega's announced plans for updates to the game, and DLC that will only further the fervor, so it looks like the Sonic franchise is here to stay. Of course, the other big contemporary Sega franchise is the mostly big in Japan Yakuza series, of which Sega has announced that they have several games planned for the future, in spite of the fact that the series creator Toshihiro Nagoshi and series game director Daisuke Saito have both left Sega to start Nagoshi Studios. Is it possible that Yakuza will be just as good without its main creator and development leaders? I guess so. Is it likely? Absolutely not. Personally, I think this break ought to be an opportunity for Sega's younger talent to create a new game franchise based upon their own creative impulses, rather than perpetuating another person's creative work, and preferably something not glorifying organized crime. But Sega needs them some of that Yakuza money, and they won't quit it so easily. So, tough shit, guys.
You will do Yakuza, or you will lose your pinky.
In fact, Sega's announced no less than 3 new Yakuza games. Yakuza 8 is set to be released in 2024, which seems to be rather fast considering the fact that they also plan on releasing 2 Yakuza games in 2023. Like a Dragon Ishin Kiwami is a remake of a Yakuza spin-off from 2014 for the PlayStation 3 that reimagines the series' action-adventure elements in a feudal Japanese setting, as opposed to the crime-ridden back alleys of post-industrial Japan. Thus, like a Dragon Ishin Kiwami, set to be released worldwide this February, is technically not a new game, but it is officially the first Yakuza game to be released since Nagoshi and Saito left Sega in 2021. The game itself looks like a Kurosawa movie turned into a video game, with clunky looking combat and the unhinged drama and kookiness that we've come to love from the Yakuza series. Like a Dragon Ishin Kiwami will be on PC, Xbox, and PlayStation February 2023, and it looks pretty good. Also announced for 2023, but with no firm release date as of yet, is Like a Dragon Gaiden, The Man Who Erased His Name, which is intended to be a spin-off set sometime after Yakuza 6 and before the upcoming Yakuza 8. Since this is a completely new game, little is actually known about its content other than a 3-minute long cutscene released as a trailer. Being a completely new game without the creative direction and leadership of Nagoshi and Saito, this will be Ryuga Gotoku Studios' first real test to show whether or not the Sega subsidiary or the Yakuza brand still really have a future. Will it really be released this year? Seems premature to me, but supposedly, yes, that is the case. Speaking of popular subsidiaries owned by Sega Sammy, what about Atlus? Atlus started off the new year by surprising everyone with re-releases of their classic portable PlayStation Persona games. Try saying that 5 times really fast. Portable PlayStation Persona, portable PlayStation Persona, portable PlayStation Persona, portable PlayStation Persona, portable PlayStation... Persona 3 Portable is out on pretty much all platforms. It is a re-release of a remake of the original Persona 3, which came out for the PlayStation 2 back in like 2007, and it still looks better than Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. The original Persona was very well received amongst RPG fans of a certain persuasion.
Which persuasion?
And it's probable that Persona 3 Portable will be no different as long as it works. But there's more. Also on January 19th, 2023, Atlus released Persona 4 Gaiden, which was originally a PlayStation Vita remake of Persona 4 from 2012, and it looks way better than Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. As with Persona 3 Portable, Persona 4 Golden was very well received by a particular demographic. I mean nerds, okay? Otaku, weebs, guys with fedoras and body pillows, neckbeards, people who collect Pokemon cards well into their 30s. Persona 4 Golden is also on virtually every platform, pretty much now.
Come and get it, boys!
Who's next? Sega Sammy's involved with publishing games across a wide variety of subsidiaries other than Atlus. One example is Relic Entertainment, a Canadian development studio that's part of SEGA Europe. Relic is set to release Company of Heroes 3 for PC, PlayStation, and Xbox this February. Company of Heroes is a pretty well-received series with a relatively small but dedicated fan base. The last game came out in 2013, so it's been almost 10 years. And according to the fans themselves, it doesn't look like this new entry in the series is bringing much new to the table. The graphics and cutscenes, frankly, have people worried that this may not justify a purchase. Personally, as an outsider, this is a promising looking strategy war game set during World War II. I'm sure I'd like this. Then there's Hyenas, which is being developed by Creative Assembly in the UK, also technically part of the SEGA Europe subsidiary at Sammy. This game was announced in June of 2022 and will be available across most major platforms, including the Mac, but not the Nintendo Switch. Essentially, this is going to be a team-based competitive shooter with an emphasis on interactive environments, which puts it squarely in the category of vanilla generic opportunism seeking to piggyback on stuff that's already popular. The announcement trailer is a bit cringe and desperately derivative of stuff that happened a few years ago. The aesthetics kind of remind me of the Birds of Prey movie for some reason, which wasn't even cool 3 years ago. And that would have been a much better description for this game instead of hyena. Not even cool 3 years ago. The video game. Indeed, Overwatch came out more than 6 years ago, and that's obviously the game Not So Creative Reassembly had in mind when they set out to make Hyenas. Hyenas? What an awful name. No one likes hyenas. They're like the worst animal. Anyway, yes, Hyenas sadly looks to be just another instantiation of the virtually endless array of clones plaguing contemporary gaming ever since esports almost sorta became a real thing. Not so much outside of South Korea, but kind of. How will Hyenas stand apart? How will it handle pitfalls like in-game purchases, or the inherent redundancy and obsolescence of games coming from this bloated, oversaturated genre? I have no clue. Hopefully we'll find out soon. Last but not least, and I really mean it, SEGA Europe co-subsidiary Amplitude is putting out a new game sometime in 2023 called Endless Dungeon, a team-based roguelike with run-and-gun style mechanics. You gotta clear the rooms of the endless space station and grab loot and upgrades in order to get even better at grabbing yet even more loot and upgrades. Unfortunately, I'm not really feeling the art style or the robotic characters so much, but at the very least, this is less haggard and slightly less derivative than Hyenas. I can't call this a breath of fresh air because currently the video game market is pretty much flooded with roguelikes. Utilizing this sort of overhead run and gun mechanic, the team-based aspect is interesting and makes me wonder if it's not also sort of pandering to the esports phenomenon. Or maybe not, who knows? Endless Dungeon has no release date, and, surprisingly, will only be on PC, Xbox, and PlayStation, despite looking just like a Switch game. And those are the games Sega is publishing or developing in 2023. But what about Sega's Super game that they've been talking about? Well, that's not supposed to come out until 2026. Also, we didn't mention mobile games, because, well, one, that caters mostly to a different demographic, and two, Sega's mobile division is mostly an only in Japan sort of thing. So what's Sega putting out in 2023? Ryuga Gotoku Studio is releasing 2 games, Like a Dragon Ishin Kiwami and Like a Dragon Gaiden. Atlus is releasing or has released 2 remakes of remakes, Persona 3 Portable and Persona 4 Golden. Then there's games being produced by SEGA Europe, Company of Heroes by Relic Entertainment, Hyenas by Creative Assembly, and Endless Dungeon by Amplitude. That's 7 games in 2023. Of these, roughly half are remakes or reissues of older games, and only one has really generated much buzz or anticipation. Like a Dragon Gaiden will be Ryuga Gotoku's first real trial to demonstrate whether or not the Yakuza team can survive the loss of the series creator Toshihiro Nagoshi. But other than that, there's virtually nothing to get excited about if you're a Sega fan in 2023. And yet, when you consider the long list of beloved Sega IPs that sit unloved and dormant, this is really kind of a travesty. Phantasy Star, Shinobi, Crazy Taxi, Golden Axe, Space Harrier, Alex Kidd, Virtual Fighter, Outrun, the list goes on and on. The success of Streets of Rage 4, developed by fans working at third-party studios, should have demonstrated that Sega is sitting on a lot of untapped potential and excitement. The best new Sega game in 2023 might very well turn out to be Cyber Bomb Rush, a spiritual successor to Sega's Jet Set Radio for the Dreamcast that's being developed by a small independent studio in the Netherlands, a fan game. So once again, as with Sonic Mania and Streets of Rage 4, a fan game might be the best Sega game of the year. That's a pretty strange and sad thought, and yet it keeps happening. So is Sega pretty much dead as a game developer? If 2023 is any indication, then it appears to me that they are winding down. Even the future of their retro game market seems to be in question question given the loss of Reiko Kodama and the end of the Sega Ages brand. Nagoshi is gone, and Yakuza may or may not creatively survive his absence. Atlus still hangs in there thanks to the perennial popularity of Persona, and all of Sega's weird European PC subsidiaries continue to produce generic, obligatory games that fail to stand out in any meaningful way. For the future, at least Sega still has Sonic. Sonic Frontiers may not be a truly great game, but it's good enough to endear itself to longtime fans, and it's probably earned Sonic Team an extra life, because had it failed commercially, I think Sega Sammy would have considered bringing down the axe on video games in general. So what do you think about the state of Sega in 2023? Do any of these games interest you? Do you think Sega Sammy will ultimately move away from video games entirely and stick to pachinko parlors and hotels? Are we approaching the end of an era? Please let us know what you think and more in the comments. And thank you very much for watching. Bye bye now.